Welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast presented by Reenergize Professional Coaching. We appreciate you listening in and learning with us. The stories and leadership tips you hear will help you become a great leader. Listen intentionally. Now, to our host, Sean Olson.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast. This is the podcast where you hear the stories of real people just like you who become extraordinary leaders. You'll learn valuable lessons from their lives, lessons you can apply to become the greatest leader you were created to be. When leaders are intentional, lives are changed. I'm your host, Sean Olson. I am an author, speaker, business owner, and I love being a podcast host. And we thank you for joining us today. As we get rolling today, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, leave us some comments so that all the worlds of algorithms love us. But we are glad to have you here with us. And today I am pleased to introduce my guest, Jim Bouchard. Jim is the founder of the Keep It Human Network, and he is also an author. Jim, it is awesome to have you here with us today. Welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast.
Oh, thanks for your hospitality. And yes, mercy. Yes, we got to keep those algorithms happy.
Hey, you know what? That's just kind of the way the whole thing works anymore, isn't it? So,
no.
Hey, Jim, I know our listeners are familiar with the show. We've had a conversation, but we love to get to know our guests and just connect with who you are as a person. So, kind of walk us through your professional career and leadership lessons learned along the way.
Oh, you want the resume, huh?
The resume, but the fun stuff, not the bad stuff. How's that?
Yeah. Well, this whole, actually, I can't avoid the bad stuff. This whole trip started former drug addict and dropout, and I used to think that was a pretty poor resume for someone dealing in leadership. But the short story is, part of my recovery was martial arts. That's how I got involved in martial arts. I didn't know it was going to become a 25 plus year career. I certainly didn't know it was going to turn into writing books and speaking all over the place, but it did, and that was a very happy accident. We'll get into the parallels in a minute, but part of the reason I realized it was a good resume was because leadership's about transformation, right? I mean, leaders are in the transformation business. You're transforming yourself, your organization, the people around you, and you have to change with the times. I mean, you and I didn't make this up. I think Pliny the Elder about 2,000 years ago said the only constant in life is change, right?
Yep.
And that is just as true today. So I came to realize that who better to talk about transformation than someone that had to learn it to survive. And by rights, I should be dead or in jail many times over. And that led to the whole Sensei adventure. And Sensei de facto is a leader. And we can get into why that happens and how I came to that conclusion. But in a nutshell, that's the 101 version of how I went from loser to leader, I suppose, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah, let's dive into this for a second, if you're okay with it, because obviously I want our people to connect. And addiction's a big issue. And I'm not going to limit addiction to drugs. It seems like that was where you were. Addictions come out in all different realms. So talk about, just for a moment, if you would, that moment where you're kind of like, you quote unquote hit bottom. And how did you pull yourself out? Were there people involved in that? Were there people that came alongside of you? But what was that transformation for you when you hit the bottom?
Yeah, I hesitate to use the word always, but I'd say most of the time there were other people involved. There certainly was for me. I didn't realize they were around, to be honest with you. Some of the people that were most supportive when I decided to quit were people who had, I didn't realize they were still in my life. They were watching from the sidelines, so to speak. Because they knew, in fact, one person in particular who was my guidance counselor in high school, in fact, and we remained friends after that. We became brothers by choice up until we lost him a few years ago to cancer. But he was family by choice, and he was one of the people that helped a great deal. And I asked him one time, I said, "Why didn't you jump in and smack me in the head?" And he was very wise. He said, "I couldn't help you till you wanted help," right?
Yeah.
And that's something people have to realize. And I know there's often, this comes up a lot when I'm talking because I share my story, right? And a lot of times people feel guilty about that. They say, well, what could I have done? How could I have helped? And I hope it makes them feel better when I say, not a heck of a lot you can do.
Right.
Love the person, support them the best you can. Try not to enable them because that can make things worse. And that's difficult to do sometimes. Sometimes in best intentions, you're stepping in trying to help, but you're really enabling. So it's not an easy thing to watch somebody do that. And sometimes we don't realize, I certainly didn't realize it because I didn't think my life mattered to anyone else. So we don't realize the damage we're doing around us, right? The hurt that we're causing to the people around us. But hey, thankfully, a bit of luck, and here we are today, able to talk. A bit of luck and a lot of support, and martial arts. Seriously, martial arts helped a great deal.
So how did martial arts come into play with this? Was that a prior or during your addiction time, or did somebody guide you that direction? How'd that play out?
No, I was kind of full-time in music at the time, and then a combination of music and broadcasting. Actually, I was working through a lot of that episode, most of that episode. I don't know how. Some of it I wasn't, but a lot of it I was. I honestly don't know how I was functioning at that point. But at any rate, it was, martial arts, my brother mostly. My brother had gotten into martial arts and boxing and whatnot, and he kept nagging away from the corner of my ear here. And he said, hey, I think you should try this. I think it would change your life, right? And one day it went all the way in. I was walking down the street in Portland, Maine, and a big giant sign was, hey, this was after I quit drugs, but quitting drugs is easy. Staying off drugs is very hard. So, I'm looking for things to fill my time, looking for some positive habits, some positive disciplines to replace the negative ones. So there's this giant sign that says karate. I walked in. It was up the stairs. It was a second floor. I saw two guys throwing each other around. I thought that was really cool. I thought it was so cool, I turned around, walked right back out. Thank goodness. I think my first master, I think he needed students at the time because he chased me out into the street. And he said, hey, looked like you were having fun. Watch it. Yeah. I came up with every excuse in the book. He matched those excuses with some solutions, and that was the beginning of the whole thing. So, I credit him. If he hadn't come out on the street that day, I don't know. Who knows what would have happened, right?
That's awesome. So with your martial arts career, and you're obviously tying that back to leadership, you've written a book about that. So just really quickly, give us like 2 or 3 aspects of martial arts and how that translates to leadership principles that help us really grow.
Yeah, there are a lot of ideas or a lot of things we can borrow from martial arts life that translate perfectly into real world. That's how the whole business of speaking got started. I mean, people they were just asking me to come out and talk about the martial arts philosophy and how it might relate to real life. And again, thankfully, I had masters. That was their focus. In fact, one Professor Nick Sirio, terrific guy, and he used to define black belt as nothing more than the acquiring of a learning attitude, a good learning attitude. Mm-hmm. And his appeal to us all the time was not just in the dojo. You learn how to learn mostly about yourself, and then you're going to apply that, but in your life, not just in the dojo, right? And so I had a lot of great teachers like that. And so fast forward, like I said, I didn't know it was going to become a career, but slowly I got more and more involved. I started teaching under the masters I was studying with. That evolved into starting my first school. Some of those guys helped me do that. That evolved into, we had a system of about 5 centers at one point. And along that route, I learned, it became very obvious that sensei is a leader. Right. Now, it's cool because a literal term sensei actually translates as one who went before. Isn't that perfect imprint for leadership? I love that. Yeah. So it's used for a martial arts instructor. It's used as a term of honor in Japan for a lot of different things. But anyway, here we really understand it as a martial arts instructor. But leader, so for years, it was funny. We ran an instructor's college, and people would ask, what exactly should a sensei be doing? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's the day-to-day stuff that everybody has to take care of. There's the management stuff, taking care of your business, keeping the doors open and the lights on. But beyond that, and teaching is fairly obvious. But, what does a teacher do? What does a genuine leader do? Well, after a lot of study and a lot of thinking about it, I came down to 3 words. And these are not just pretty words. I'm not lollipops and puppy dogs guy, right? Right. So these are not just pretty words. These are disciplines that we need to embed in our life, in our leadership practice. And they're these 3: inspire, touch people's hearts, not just their heads, right? Empower, make sure they have what they need to succeed. And guide them, be willing to offer your wisdom, your experience, your knowledge face to face. In business, we might call it mentoring. It's really what where we approach that. But that's it: inspire, empower, guide. And that's got nothing to do, and I know we're singing in harmony on this, it's got nothing to do with rank or title or position of authority, right? Those people right on your front lines that are great leaders, they inspire the people around them, they empower them, they guide them, and that's why we need to pay attention. I believe we're all leaders, whether we want to accept that or not, work on it or not. Mm-hmm. And if we focus on these 3 disciplines, that's the foundation of everything else. And I'd
is.
argue that, with my dying breath.
Yeah, and I love those three. And what's really interesting about it, the inspire one, I think most people are like, of course, that's part of our role in influencing people, is inspiring them. And it's a part of human nature. We want to invest in other people and inspire them and challenge them and congratulate them. The guide aspect, I think we like that idea of guiding. Now, there's a difference between guiding and directing, right?
Right.
Guiding, it's about them. Directing, it's about us. But that middle one of empower, I think, is where leaders struggle the most. Because to empower someone, I have to release power.
Oh, absolutely.
So talk about that empowerment. How does that play out in martial arts? How have you seen that play out with leadership?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you hit the nail right on the head. I think two of the biggest challenges for leaders is assuming they know what people need, right, to succeed. And this, again, we learned this on the floor in martial arts. I learned it, running my businesses. I've learned it now from other leaders, right? You and I do the same. When we're working with other leaders, man, that's like going to college every day, learning what they do. So it's incredible. The best leaders are very good at asking questions. They're very good at being open to new information, right? Those are two of the most powerful traits a leader can have. We have to ask people what they need. Now, that doesn't mean, see, sometimes people think, oh, that means I'm going to roll over and give people whatever they want. No, it doesn't.
No.
But to begin that negotiation, we have to be open and understand what they need and what they want. And sometimes that's very surprising. I mean, in our workshops, we can spend a couple of hours just making the list, And one of the things that needs to be shared, like you just said, is power. Now, I believe, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
I believe strongly that people too often confuse power and control. And sometimes power gets a negative connotation. In fact, I want to argue with Jordan Peterson about this. I love all his work, don't get me wrong.
And he loves to argue, so you're okay.
Well, he throws this word power around, and I get why he's doing it and the context he's using it. But that's typical of how people feel about power in a negative sense. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. No. Power philosophically is nothing more than our ability or capacity to act or perform effectively. That's what it is. That's the definition we really need to embrace, right? Control means using fear, force, coercion, right? To get things on, extract things from other people, which can be very effective sometimes. Let's not lie about it, right? But it's not the way you want to live your life long term, and it's not effective long term. The dictator is always looking over his shoulder to see who's going to kill him, right?
Right.
But at any rate, power, it only expands through how? You just hit on it, right? Sharing. If you're not willing to expand, right, you become more powerful when the people around you become more powerful. Because none of us as leaders operate by ourselves. By definition, leaders need followers.
Correct.
Our job is to, I'd say, transform me into we, right?
Right.
To get everybody rallying around some common cause. So that's it. I can only do so much by myself. When I help others become more powerful, empower them, then I become more powerful. I'm able to do more when the people around me can do more. And it's that simple. Not easy, because like I said, the list can be very long. And sometimes the topics that come up, what people need, can be very surprising. Very surprising. Yeah, even to seasoned veterans,
I totally agree with you on all that. It's interesting. I was actually having a conversation earlier this week from the opposite side of it, right? And so I like your idea of power and how we empower other people there. And I was looking at this other organization, talking to this leader, and actually went to a scriptural principle of Moses and Jethro. There's a point in scripture where Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, says, hey, Moses, what you're doing is not good, because Moses was leading everything. He would not relinquish power and ability to anybody else to try to help out, right? And I was looking at this organization, this leader is outstanding, an outstanding person, an outstanding presence, doing everything.
Yeah.
And because they're doing everything, the company's beginning to find gaps, like things aren't getting done. They're reneging on some commitments. And I just look at that and I'm like, unless you let go, you have already hit the capacity of what this organization is going to become.
Oh man, you're hitting it right out of the park, and it's not easy. Like I said, it's simple. It's not easy. And hey, I'm not preaching from the mountain. I'm preaching from the gully. I've made that mistake many times, and I think one of the big things, certainly in my life, and I've heard this from many leaders. Sometimes it's easy to get caught in that trap that No, in fact, one of my masters, it was interesting, said this in the context of operating martial arts centers, right? And he said, stop looking for yourself on the floor, right? When we're trying to train the next manager or the next teacher or the next leader, stop looking for yourself on the floor. You're never going to find them. Nobody's going to do your job as good as you will. At least that's what you think, right?
Right.
And it is, and sometimes it's true. Sometimes because of experience that you have, or just time in the game, you may be able to do things quicker, right?
Yep.
More efficiently. But think about this: every time you do that, every time you do something that someone else should be doing, you're taking time away from what you should be doing, which is
Correct.
really pulling back and looking at the bigger picture, right? And but it's difficult. It's really difficult, and that's why I think leaders need to look in the mirror a lot. And the best mirror for a leader is our people, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're going to reflect back to us. And like I said, this idea of what people need, I don't mean to be trite about that. I know our time is limited today.
No, we're good.
I mean, the list can be very, very long. I think you touched on three of the big ones, though. What people really need, they need power, they need some authority, and these are the two things that people are very hesitant to share. Autonomy is a big one, right?
Mm-hmm.
The freedom to make some choices, and frankly, along with that comes making some mistakes, right?
Yeah.
Now, you don't want people to fail foolishly. Now, that is more of a product, though, I think, of training and preparation than anything else.
Right.
We're all going to make mistakes every day, right?
Yeah.
And I like Elon Musk's philosophy about that. Part of the reason I saw an interview where they asked him how come SpaceX can advance so quickly, and he said because we're willing to make mistakes.
Right.
Where NASA, and he wasn't pooping on him. He said NASA understandably has to cross so many T's and dot so many I's so they don't make a mistake. He said we don't have that limitation. We put the rocket up, it blows up, we figure out why, we fix it, we go on to the next one. He said the reason that what that does is shorten the timeline of learning, right?
Yeah.
And so there's an interesting perspective, and that's certainly that's a martial arts philosophy. I mean, you go in a dojo, there's mirrors, right? It's not to check how pretty we are.
That's not going to be happening.
Yeah, it's to expose our mistakes in real time so that we can correct them. But the dojo is a place of failure, not a place of success.
Exactly, and those failures. Well, and I've said this before, but it's making mistakes, right?
Yeah.
If we learn from them and get better, it stays a mistake.
Which requires a word you love to use, intentionality.
Exactly.
Right?
Absolutely being intentional. If we learn from them, it stays a mistake. If we don't learn from them, it becomes a failure. Because that's the separation in the two.
I like the way you frame that. Yeah.
Yeah. Another conversation I was having just recently, a great leader. And we were talking about the fact that younger people coming up today want to have positions of leadership right off the bat, right? I want to be a manager, I want to be a senior manager, and they want to work their way through. And we want to elevate people as fast as we can. This particular person, they're in a massive industry, high dollar industry. And the comment she made was this. She said, until they've made $1 million mistake and had to navigate through that $1 million mistake, they're not ready to be a senior manager. And I thought that was so interesting.
A lot of truth to that.
There is. And, a lot of companies like $1 million mistake. Well, for them, their $1 million mistake may be a $10,000 mistake.
Yeah, you scale it.
It's a scale thing. But the point behind it was until you've made that kind of mistake where you're like, oh my goodness, what did I do? Yeah. But then you also learn from it, you navigate it, you overcome it. Then you're ready to have your eyes opened up to all those other pieces that are in front of you.
Yeah. And this isn't to pick on younger generations, but, because they're always, you can't judge any individual by the general group.
No.
Right?
And every young generation, including when we were a young generation, wanted the same thing. So,
yeah. But we always have, issues that aggravates the generation ahead of us too, right? But there are some generalizations that are very useful, very informative. And we did shield at least a couple of generational cohorts from the idea of failure, right? We tried to protect them, probably with best intentions, but it didn't work out so well. Think about it. And I know you use these words as well. Some essential qualities of a good leader: courage, right? Confidence. These things don't come out of thin air. In fact, courage is a good one to talk about, because people misunderstand that. Courage is not the absence of fear. The absence of fear is stupidity, right?
Right.
In fact, courage is the recognition of fear and danger and risk. Without danger and risk, the exposure to failure, there is no courage. Courage is defined by that. And you don't know how courageous you are until you're exposed to that danger. And I learned that as a very young man, as a volunteer firefighter, right? I went through the same training as everybody else. And let's say 10 of us went through the same training. Then we hit our first big fire and 2 people freak out. Why? You don't know until you test it. And I'm not picking on those people. It's a scary situation. That's fine. That's what happens. It's part of, how we discover what we're suited for. But having said that, courage is facing those fears, doing what you need to do anyway. In fact, a lot of times people they get weirded out when I say this, because they'll say, "You're a very confident guy." I said, "No, I'm not. Drug addicts are not very confident people." And I said, the reason I got into drugs, a lot of it had to do with a lack of self-evaluation, right? Self-worth.
Right.
So that's something I don't think I'll live long enough to overcome my struggles with confidence. But I've learned to substitute courage, right? I'll take a chance. If something scares me or I don't feel confident about it, I'll take a chance. Yep. And then that's how I overcome it. And then what confidence that I'm able to muster comes from that focus and training and preparation. I don't have confidence or surety in an outcome. And I think that's a mistake a lot of leaders might make, right? If you base your confidence and surety of an outcome, you're going to be in trouble, because then when you fail, right? It's a bad scene. But if your confidence is based on your preparation, I know, hey, I don't know if I'm going to win this fight, but I deserve to be in the ring, right? I've done everything I can to prepare. That guy might beat me, but I've done everything I can to prepare. I'm ready. Yep. That's genuine confidence. And I think when a good leader has that type of confidence, that's how we're able to pick ourselves up when we get knocked down, right? And the old saying in martial arts is knock down 7 times, get up 8, right?
I like it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, let's focus on you for a second. I know you have created the Keep It Human Network. What is the Keep It Human Network? What are you doing? And how can our listeners possibly pull you in?
That's a dream I've had for a long time. It's funny, because you speak, and I know we talked about this. Don't get me wrong, I love all of it, but I particularly love workshops because we can really dig in and do some work, right? I do a lot of conference speaking. You have anywhere from a half an hour to 90 minutes, right? That's it.
Right.
How deep can we get? So for a long time, I realized that was the beginning of the conversation. We needed to continue the conversation. And so I was looking for a platform where we could do that, because we have great leaders all over the world. I mean, at all levels too. I'm not talking, when I say great leaders, I'm not talking about a position of authority.
Correct.
I'm talking about good people that inspire others and empower them and so on. So at any rate, wanted to put together some platform where they could share ideas, talk with one another, right? And that we could curate, different materials like online courses and things. So I was trying to cobble it together by about 5 different, machinations, whatever you call these things. And I found Mighty Networks, which was kind of cool. I'm not getting commissioned, so I don't mind talking about it. But that pulled it all together. So the way to find us is keepithuman.network. And we set up one level that'll be the free forever level, right? That's hard to say, professional speaker. But at any rate, it's called the Engage Plan, and just come on there and join and see what's going on there. It's just started, so there's a few people that we planted in there, but it's growing every day, and So
that's awesome. So what's the purpose and the drive behind the network? So if I'm getting on there, what am I going to gain from it?
It's a place where people who believe in putting people first can get together, human-centric leaders, where we can support one another, learn from one another, help each other grow. And sometimes, it's funny because a lot of times people think about advancing, right? I want to advance. That's cool. But a lot of times we just need some support and some recognition and some validation too. So I wanted to make sure that was available. And that's why there's open chats and conversation groups. When certain topics, we're trying to wrestle with this idea of hybrid work right now, right? Remote versus in office. So we started it's called a space on that platform. We started a space just for that, right?
Yep.
And we're starting that conversation. And we'll do that as topics come up. Another big one we're going to be tackling soon is the generational, cultural, and political divides that we're facing, right? Somebody just told me on another podcast, I thought, I'd read for the first time, we had 4 generations in the same workspace.
Yep.
She said, no, it's 5 now. Just as a few weeks ago, we're seeing 5 generations in the same workspace.
Yep.
How do we reconcile that, right? So
that's
not great. A lot of answers. We got a lot of questions, but I believe, and I think, again, we're singing in harmony. The best leaders are not the people who have all the answers. We have another name for that kind of guy. Starts with an A, ends with an E. You can fill in the blank. The best leaders I've ever met are the people who know continually how to ask the right questions and to continually seek some resolution, right? But I like what Thomas Sewell said a while ago. He said, there are no solutions really. There are only trade-offs.
Right.
And again, leaders are in that trade-off business. What's the best thing for us to do today with what knowledge we have and experience we have today? Tomorrow it could change. So.
Yeah, and I mean, you talked about the word courage, and I always like to say that the greatest leaders today are both courageous and curious, right? Mm-hmm. And so you think about that network aspect, what you're trying to build up. Sometimes it's having the curiosity and the courage to just have the conversation. Like, I don't have to have the answers.
No.
I don't even have to know what the questions are, right? If I don't know what I don't know, where can I connect with people to figure out how to figure out what I don't know and then learn what I don't know? And so it's that courage to say, I don't have all the answers. I don't know what's taking place there. And I even like the way that you're basically embodying this for yourself, right? You said we've launched this. We're going to keep going. So what I'm hearing behind that is, I know what I want to do. I'm not sure what it's going to look like, but you got to start walking.
Right? I have no idea. I mean, one of the greatest gifts, Marshall, and you triggered a couple of things. I'm scribbling furiously here because you triggered a couple of cool things. But one of the greatest gifts I learned in martial arts was perfection is not a destination. It's a never-ending process, right? We have this idea in Western world sometimes that we're looking for fixed things, We're looking for a solution. Thomas Sewell already blew that out of the water. We're looking for balance, work-life balance. Well, that's not a static thing. Our needs and our priorities change on sometimes a moment-to-moment basis. We've got to be agile and adaptable, right? Flexible, adaptable, and comfortable with uncertainty. How about that?
Absolutely.
The other thing you talked about, and you hit this a couple of times, you were talking about, advancement. And there's a difference between a position of authority and leadership. A lot of young people are champing at the bit. I think most of us were at some point. I wasn't. I'm still kind of a reluctant leader, but yeah, I understand what you're saying. I ran into a guy. This was when we were speaking in Cuba, actually, and we were talking about being open to going to your front lines and getting feedback from them, to purposely do that, intentionally, to use your word, right? To do that. And he had a problem with this. One of the few times where we ran into some cultural differences, as far as we see many more similarities than differences across different cultures for leadership. But this was important. This was an important difference. He said, if I do that, he said, first of all, those people on the front lines will think I don't know what I'm doing. I said, but you don't.
Exactly.
Yeah. He said, you have no idea. I mean, he was a good manager, but he had come out of college into a management position, right? Yep. He didn't know what those people were doing on the front lines. He had no idea. He didn't come up through the ranks. Right. And then he was afraid his superiors would think he didn't know what he was doing. So it was interesting. What a blessing. A couple of years later, I ran into him in Las Vegas at another conference. He said, you remember me? He was from Jamaica. I said, you remember me, the guy from Jamaica? I said, yeah. And making the story very short, I said, did you try those things? How did it work out? He said, my people are coming to me with ideas now. He said, they never would before. He said, so that's pretty cool. My superiors still aren't on board yet. And I said, yeah, it takes time. I said, but don't worry about it. I said, you're going to be in their office in a few years. Yeah. You're going to be the guy making the changes, right? So that was,
and keep the frontliners coming when you're there.
Yeah, right. The other thing you were talking about is this idea of curiosity. I love that word. Part of the reason I share my story about drug addiction is when I achieved my first black belt, that was the best moment of my life. It really was. And they give you kind of a cheap belt at the test. So when I got home, my master had a present for me. It was a heavyweight black belt. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, right? But he said, this is going to change if you stay in the martial arts. You're going to tie it and untie it thousands of times, get dragged across the floor, crying it, sweating it, bleeding it. All those things happen, right?
Right.
And it did change. It got gray. And there's pictures of this on my website, by the way. It got gray. That happens to the best of us. But purposely, the black cover starts to fray and tear off after a while, right? Underneath is a different belt, and this is intentional. It's a white belt, which represents what to martial artists? Beginning, right? Okay. So so we reflect on the true mind of the master, which we call in martial arts beginner's mind. Always approach the day with a sense of curiosity and wonder, happy and never satisfied, right? Perfection is not a destination; it's a never-ending process. So the more we embrace that process, the better we'll be as people and certainly as leaders. So the best leaders never stop learning, never stop growing, right? Never stop trying to do a better job. So. Yeah. The worst leaders are these guys, right? I'm the greatest leader on. Mm-hmm. and right, you run into him. I run into him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to spend 1 minute though, or maybe 2 minutes on this piece because I love what you said. I absolutely agree with what you said. And that's where we have to be intentional as leaders to be learning. Mm-hmm. I've also run into a number of leaders today that take that mentality of the learning mindset. Mm-hmm. And because of that, they constantly shift with the wind with everything that they're seeing and hearing. It's like the shiny object syndrome.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, when I think of martial arts, I'm not into martial arts, never done it. Just, it's that outside observation is yes, they are learning and they're focused though, right? They never lose sight of what they're supposed to be doing. And so how do you talk to a leader, Jim, around this aspect of keep learning, keep growing, keep getting better, but also stay focused on what you're actually doing? Don't pivot with the wind.
It comes down to responsibility. I mean, sometimes you do need to pivot, right? Sometimes you do. But you need to consider it. Like the term you used, I think is very applicable, that shiny object syndrome. And I have to admit, I'm kind of guilty of that sometimes. I'm a very curious person. So I see something. So, well, what I've learned to discipline myself to do is this. Keep learning about it. Mm-hmm. But then before implementation, right, before I just run out and implement it, which I used to do quite frequently, is pull back a little bit. Take a breath, a little bit of time. And it's funny because the parallel is perfect in the ring. The best fighters don't panic. You know what I mean? And Muhammad Ali is a great example of it. We just rewatched When We Were Kings, which I think is a terrific documentary. And for leaders, we're going to do a podcast called Popcorn Leadership. We're going to watch these movies and dissect the leadership lessons. And that's one we're going to do. It's fantastic. He's in the ring against George Foreman, and it looks like a complete disaster. He's getting pounded on. But what he was doing is he was laying back and assessing the situation and letting Big George punch himself out, right? Until he found the opening. And then bang. Now he had prepared 3 or 4 different strategies for that fight. He didn't know which one he was going to use, you see. But he learned, if we want to use the word, the through line that we're doing, right? He had learned 3 or 4 different ways to do that. And one of them was kind of new, not just to him, but to boxing in general. Yeah. We know it as the rope-a-dope. Traditionally, that was
here we go.
You don't stay on the ropes. You don't lean back on the ropes and let the guy. No, but he thought about that. He saw where that might work and apply it. So I mean, learn as much as you can. Learn everything you can. But before you just charge in. Now, having said that, and this is the yin and yang of things, I've learned that from my Eastern teachers. I learned this great truth. This may be right, and this may be right at the same time. Absolutely. So it's all a matter of situation and application and timing. Sometimes it's better to ready, fire, aim, right?
Correct.
And you're not going to know. So the through line discipline with that, again, is that idea of courage that, no matter which here's something. Sometimes when we're talking about failure and making mistakes, I say to leaders, truthfully, whatever you do, whatever decision you make is not the wrong decision, as long as you're earnest in what your study of the situation. I said, now, 10 minutes later, it may be the wrong decision, right? But right now, if you really operate and you're operating sincerely with the information you have right here and right now, you're making a decision. That's part and parcel. That's one of the responsibilities of leadership. You have to make a decision. Okay, it's the right one. Again, 10 minutes, it may be the wrong one. So now we're back to being flexible, adaptable, and comfortable with uncertainty. Right. So,
and with that's where the human element comes in too, though, right? Okay, we made this decision. We realize at whatever point this isn't working. It isn't working anymore. Not working the way we thought it was.
Right.
The human side is the ability to actually admit it. Because there's so many people who are like, they dig their heels in of, no, we're going to make this work, even though there's no chance. No, as a human, just say, you know what? Didn't work. Let's figure it out.
You can end up, I live in Maine, so this actually is a real life situation. You can end up down a long, endless dirt road. In the middle of nowhere. You can end up in Canada up here if you're not willing to admit, hey, maybe I took the wrong turn. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with ending up in Canada.
No, nothing wrong with Canada.
Yeah, but you can.
I'm with you.
You find bodies up on the border all the time. People that took the wrong turn.
Yep. Well, Jim, I think we could go on all day about this, but we can't. But I do want to wrap up with the same question we always do, because this is the Intentional Leader podcast. We like to set our listeners up for success, especially with practical pieces. So, Jim, what is something our listeners can intentionally do today to be more effective as a leader?
I'm going to be a pain, and I'm going to open up a big topic, and I'm doing this intentionally because, first of all, it'll probably lead to another discussion here, and certainly we've already talked about having you on the Keep It Human podcast, so we can continue it there. A lot of times, especially when I'm doing media, people will press me and say, "Can you sum up all of this stuff in one concise thought?" And here's what I've learned to lean on: it's leadership is sharing. A leader shares. The rest of the conversation is about what we're willing to share and how, which you touched on earlier, right? Those are the things we really need to consider. So that's the work that you need to do. Think about what you're willing to share and how. So just remember those words. Leadership is sharing. A leader shares.
I love that. A thought that popped in my mind with that one. I have had tons of organizations say, I love how transparent our leadership is. I have never heard an organization say our leadership's too transparent.
No, that's pretty rare. Yeah,
they've never said that, because sharing makes all the difference.
Right.
Well, Jim, it's been awesome to have you here. Listeners, in the show notes today, you can find links to find Jim with his network and everything else that he's doing if you want to bring him in to speak or do a workshop for you. But Jim, we appreciate your time, and just pray blessings as you keep going out there to impact people.
Thanks, Sean. I look forward to our next conversation.
All right. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast presented by Reenergize Professional Coaching. Be sure to see the show notes for links to Reenergize Professional Coaching and links to contact our guests. Now, hit that subscribe button so that you are alerted with every new episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast.